Welcome to the Word for 2022. Today, I want us to look at Psalm 13. Now, as David begins this psalm, he's struggling with his thoughts. He's gone to the Lord, but God has been silent. David's been in this situation, and God has been silent for some time. 4 times David says, "How long?" And whenever there is an extended time where God is silent or things don't change, despair can easily set in. And when that takes place, 4 things usually rise up within us. And that's what we see in David. The first thing that David does, one of the first reactions, is that of exaggeration. David says, after he first goes to the Lord and says, "How long, O Lord?" Then he says, "Will you forget me forever?" David uses a blanket statement. Because God has been silent and things aren't changing, he starts to exaggerate and he says, "Will you forget me forever?" That's very common to do. The second thing is that of self-pity. David says, "How long will you hide your face from me?" It's very easy sometimes when God is silent and things aren't changing to question, is God really there? Does God really care? And that's what David is doing here. The third thing is where David says, "How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart?" David, he's been trying to take control. When God doesn't seem to be doing anything, then as though David were saying, well, I need to do something. And in this verse, it's as though David were saying, I'm trying to come up with a plan, but I'm so frustrated and I'm weighed down with worry. And then the fourth reaction is that of resentment. How long will my enemy triumph over me, David says. He's now becoming angry and resentful. David is giving us a picture of himself. In verses 1 and 2, it's as though we see David on his face before the Lord. In verses 3 and 4, it's as though David now were on his knees, and we can hear his prayer. David says, "Look on me and answer, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." We see David on his knees in prayer. Everything changes, however, in the very first word in verse 5. It's the word but. Growing up, I used to love watching television, and one of the shows, a short show, would come on, and it was called Schoolhouse Rock. And one of those episodes was called Conjunction Junction. Now, Schoolhouse Rock, it was helping you to learn English grammar, and they would put it to music so you remember it. In this little episode, conjunctions were talked about. And the 3 main conjunctions are and, but, and or. And a conjunction, it connects sentences and words or phrases together to make a complete thought. With the conjunction but, David is now able to go in a completely different direction. In the first 4 verses, David has a lot to complain about. But when he looked upon God's character, upon God's faithfulness, and upon God's goodness, he then realized that he had more to be thankful for than he had to complain about. Again, the picture, he was first on his face before God complaining. The second, he was on his knees in prayer. And now it's as though he were standing up and he says, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me." David encourages himself in the Lord by telling himself that he will trust, rejoice, and sing because the Lord has been so good to him in the past. The word good can also be translated bountiful. When we begin to be thankful, we're able to see our problems from a brand new perspective. We begin to see our difficulties, our struggles, and our trials from God's perspective, and that changes everything. The optimist says, well, my glass, it's half full. The pessimist says, my glass is half empty. But the child of God, because we have God and we have His perspective, we should be able to say, my cup overflows. The way to overcome anxiety and worry and despair, even when God is silent, is to focus upon God's character, God's love, and God's faithfulness and goodness. And when we do, and we focus upon God's Word and who He is, then we're able to sing a song of victory. And then we can lift our heads up and we can see from heaven's perspective. Thank you for joining the Word for 2022.